Hi, I'm Justin Barrett. I'm president of Blueprint 1543. I'm a psychological scientist and a former university professor. And on this episode, I'd like to talk about identity. Identity in Jesus, not politics. Psychological theorist Erik Erikson contended that the most prominent psychosocial challenge for adolescents to overcome is forming a sense of identity. Who am I? What do I want to do with my life? Who do I identify with? What do I believe in? What are my primary values? To which social group do I belong? It's no surprise that books and television centered around teens and young adults often focus on these questions of identity. Whether it's The Breakfast Club, Mean Girls, or Spider-Man, identity formation is a big part of growing up in the movies and real life. But identity formation doesn't magically end when we graduate high school. Often identity formation continues into our 20s and may need tuning throughout the rest of our life as situations and relationships change. For instance, many in their 40s, 50s, and 60s become grandparents, and so being a grandparent is suddenly a big part of an identity that wasn't there before. This constant reflection on our identities is part of why personality inventories, like the Big Five personality inventory, are a subject of fascination, especially for young adults. What makes me unique or distinctive across social settings? Who is the real me? This is an enduring question. These questions are especially salient for people in individualistic cultural settings. But another big part of our identity, no matter where we live, is what's termed our social identity, the aspect of our self-concept that is defined by group membership. Who are my people? With whom do I belong? Traditionally, our social identity is located in our family or clan. When asked, who are you? A reasonable answer would have been to say who your ancestors were. You can see such identification throughout the Old Testament of the Bible. The Ammonites are descended of Lot's son Ben-Ami. The Moabites are descendants of Lot's son Moab, hence Moabites. And there are dozens more of such groups. Read the Old Testament, they just keep coming up. Though we may still carry some of our group identity through such familial history and relations, clans have largely been replaced by larger, more complex groups called tribes. Generally, tribes are those people who share a common language, customs, manners, religious practices, values, and history. But tribes have been grouped or absorbed into large cities, regions, or nations, these newer social groups or group memberships that we can have and identify with. As these group identities have become larger and more diverse, they lack the same ability to help us identify ourselves to answer that question, who am I? If being an American can mean speaking any number of different languages or having any diversity of values, dressing any which way, and so on, being an American does very little to help answer that question, who am I? A helpful group identity reduces diversity within the group and increases distinctiveness in comparison with those outside the group. Just 100 years ago, Americans more closely identified with the city or region that they came from as a social identity than their national identity. The common thread of World War II, the centralization of public government resources as part of that war effort, and the smoothing out of local accents and word choices due to national radio and then television broadcasting helped erode these more local group identities. But as we've drifted from the sorts of group identity markers that our basic human psychology operated upon for thousands of years, we find ourselves struggling to find secure and satisfactory group identity to help fill out our personal identity. Family, clan, tribe, region, and professional guild used to do this job. Our religious affiliation used to be an important part of our group and personal identity. But with increasingly transient living, rapid changes in employment, dynamic cultural change, and abandonment of religious identities, we find ourselves seeking after new group memberships that have enough meaning to help us have this stable identity. Sadly, especially in the United States, politics has entered this space in multiple ways. Thanks in part to the omnipresent digital broadcast media, we can constantly be told that we must have an allegiance to a particular political party, movement, or personality. And the sales pitches are pretty effective when they push the right deep psychological buttons. The need for making meaning of life, the need for guiding values, a desire for broader purpose, and heroes to look up to. Why are politics dividing families today? because we've started believing that our favorite candidates can give us a more satisfactory identity than our family can. As a result, we can end up hating people who love us for the sake of someone who doesn't even know we exist. Secondarily, political candidates and parties have generally taken a sociological approach instead of a psychological approach to trying to attract and retain power. What I mean is that instead of focusing on the individual needs and wishes of voters, they've tried to extract the allegiance of various groups, unions, professions, guilds, races, ethnicities, sexualities, and so on. Notice how politicians and political journalists refer to the needs, wants, and votes of various communities that are not real communities at all, but helpful political fictions. In subtle and not so subtle ways, they teach us that our membership in these communities matter more than our personal identity, our identity as part of a tribe or city, or our religious identity. No wonder we increasingly identify with these non-groups as part of our social identity. But because they aren't real, no wonder they leave us feeling uneasy and insecure in answering the question, who am I? The outlook is a little grim, but an answer is available to those of us who find our identity in Jesus instead of politics. In Ephesians 2:19, Paul writes, "You are no longer foreigners and strangers, but fellow citizens with God's people and also members of his household." 1 John, the Apostle John writes, "See what great love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called the children of God. And that is what we are." That's 1 John 3:1. We're part of his clan, his family. Or Apostle Peter wrote in 1 Peter 2:9, "You are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light." And famously in Galatians, Paul wrote, "For all of you who were baptized into Christ have clothed yourselves with Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus." This identity in Jesus can fill in all of the questions about what my purpose is, what my values are, how to find meaning, and which people I am attached to most firmly. Let's not let any other identity take priority over this one. Who am I? A follower of Jesus. Those are my comments on identity in Jesus, not in politics. As always, like, subscribe, share this channel with people that you would think will find valuable. And by all means, leave us comments and suggestions of topics you'd like to hear me reflect upon. Until next time, be well.